One, you alluded to when Councilmember Siegel spoke about the inaccuracy of this getting to Googleplex from Fresno or wherever in 40 minutes.
Right.
I'd read this previously in the press, and a lot of us here were pretty astounded. So this has been repeated publicly by the head of the High-Speed Rail Authority.
Right.
So it's not just kind of a little misunderstanding of the geography of Silicon Valley. It's a fundamental claim that's being made about the value and the service of this system to the technology jobs of Silicon Valley. And it's off by an order of is 2x. And this is the kind of thing that you know, it's also we're hearing a lot of statements that basically sound like sprawl inducement as an attraction of commuters, and the claims of low-income commuters, whether from you or from other people associated with the project, being able to commute from the Central Valley. And what's the anticipated fare from Fresno to even downtown San Jose, which is not the heart of Silicon Valley, but what's the anticipated fare?
Well, if we had the high-speed rail operating today, I mean, I don't know that subset. If we had a high-speed rail operating today, our ridership models are predicated on being at about 85% of discounted airline fare. So today you could go from downtown San Francisco to downtown LA for about $83. Now, what subsets happen, how people deal with advanced purchases, I mean, there'll be kind of an airline fare model, how people deal with commute checks, how people deal with multiple purchases. Really, a lot of that's going to end up being the province of the private sector operator. But just to give you a general sense, that's the best number I can
I'll
give.
just leave it that I find it highly unlikely that low-income workers are going to be able to use this system to commute to the heart of Silicon Valley.
Well, let me, I didn't mean to interrupt if you wanted to continue to, let me just address a couple of those. You know, first of all, on the Google thing, I was using that really more as an illustrative example as opposed to a specific example. And you know, that's fine. I'll take the criticism.
Google might be in San Jose and down to Bakersfield before you build the rail.
Yeah,
whether it's Google or Facebook or LinkedIn or SAP or any of the primary employers in Silicon Valley, that doesn't apply.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that respectfully, Mayor, because I met with a half a dozen tech companies about this. I'm not going to sit here and name them because I don't want to do that, but they are all household names. And we briefed them on this plan, and I got the very distinct impression from those meetings that they were looking at with great interest at this. Carl Bordino, who is the head of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, has certainly been vocal on this subject. But hearing directly from some of the companies themselves, one of the companies said that they were among the oldest companies in Silicon Valley and that they'd always supported transportation projects and that they had always supported their workers by helping to offset costs of transportation. The facts will be what they are. Let me just talk a little bit about the sprawl issue, because as I said, I care about this very personally and very directly. I've given many speeches, been on the record as saying that to me, high-speed rail is a tool like any other tool. And one thing we know about technology is that for the most part, by its nature, it's neither good or bad. It depends on how one uses it. You can use a hammer to build a house. You can use a hammer to hit somebody over the head. And if high-speed rail turns out to be sprawl-inducing in the Central Valley, that will not be a good thing, and I will not sleep well at night worrying about that. But I will also tell you that having spent much of the last 4.5 years spending time in the Central Valley, what's going on there now in the absence of anything like high-speed rail is pretty appalling. That what's going on now is you look at the city of Fresno, not the county of Fresno, but the city of Fresno, which converted 50,000 acres of agricultural land to development in the last 20 years. By the way, the entire 130 miles of high-speed rail in the Central Valley uses 4,500 acres. We've already set aside 5,000 acres for permanent protection, so we're already protecting more land than we would take. Kings County has the best agricultural land preservation rules of any of the counties in the Central Valley. Kings County merely converted 20,000 acres. So I'm just saying, what's going on there now, the partnership, the experts who look at the Central Valley believe that if current trends in the Central Valley continue, fully 10% of the 6 million acres of agricultural land in the Central Valley will be lost to development by 2050, and finally, all of the planners that we talked to, most of the planners we talked to in Fresno and up and down the Central Valley, where we're providing planning money to them, believe that high-speed rail is the one tool they have to comply with the new state requirements on transit and land use plans.
So that's a much broader discussion. It's fine that you went down that path, but it's a much broader discussion about the economic value of high-speed rail to the Central Valley. I brought it up specifically around the issue of whether high-speed rail will be an effective commuter tool for tech workers or low-income workers who work in the tech jobs in Silicon Valley and would and live in the Central Valley. That's what I was talking about.
Right.
And when you said, having spoken with leaders of a number of the tech companies, that somehow that disputed what I had said, which is there aren't tech jobs in Silicon Valley that you're going to reach in 40 minutes from Fresno by high-speed rail. Those claims that you made didn't dispute what I said at all. And I think we need to get on kind of a reasonable track there. I know those, I speak with those same companies, and some of them are in my city, and I'm telling you, they're not going to be there in 40 minutes. And we already heard that. The only company in Silicon Valley that you're going to arrive in 40 minutes by high-speed rail from Fresno is Adobe Systems in downtown San Jose. Every other company in Silicon Valley has probably 2 different mode shifts to get to the door-to-door. So setting that aside for a moment, I want to caution against making inflated claims. And we just all need to get down to talking about the realistic parts of this and not what I think is really some inflated claim there. So one thing is, you said that you already have enough funds allocated to build the IOS in San Jose.
Correct.
But isn't, and the LAO report, I think what they were actually in part talking about was that a great deal of those funds are predicated on the extension of the cap and trade system, and that high-speed rail, which under current legislation, isn't it correct that the funding, the cap and trade dollars only extended to 2020? Is that correct?
Well, it depends on whom you ask, because...
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Okay, well, I will tell you what our Department of Finance said, which is you should high-speed rail use for your planning purposes an assumption that the cap and trade funds continue. And there's a dispute about that.
Wait a minute. Assumption that's different from my question.
Well,
Under current legislation.
what I'm telling you, Mayor, is that there are different interpretations of what the current legislation says. Mayor, I'm happy to engage with you on this. Would you like me to explain?
Go ahead.
The current legislation is AB 32. It was passed in 2006 by the legislature. It's the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, and it establishes a number of goals for California to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. The most prominent of them are basically to get to, I think it's 80% of 1990 levels by 2050 or something like that. There is no question, no one anywhere has questioned whether or not AB 32 is going away. It's not going away. AB 32 is going to remain the law of the land. And AB 32 provides that in its most fundamental form, that there will be these reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in the process of developing AB 32, a number of people, particularly in the business sector, said that they wanted to find a way to have a market mechanism and not to have simply a command and control regulatory regime for that. The market mechanism was cap and trade. Cap and trade, there was language in the legislation that some people interpret as having that market mechanism go away in 2020. Other people say, no, it's tied to the underlying targets that go out to 2050. There is a question about that. I would like to see the legislature clarify that, because in our business plan, we use those cap and trade monies in part for financing. But let me offer this to you very specifically. Last year, the California legislature passed Senate Bill 9. Senate Bill 9 directed the Secretary of Transportation to develop and present to the legislature 5-year plans for the use of cap and trade money starting in 2018. Now, if the legislature thought that this was going away in 2020, it really wouldn't make sense for them to tell the Secretary of Transportation to develop plans starting in 2018 that are 5-year plans. I'd also like to point out that Senate Bill 9 passed the state Senate on a vote of 39-0. So the legislative analyst made it clear that this is an area that the legislature should clarify. But for our purposes, what we've said, and I've been very careful to say it, is with the funds in hand or current allocations, if they continue, we will have sufficient funds. So I'm fully aware of the debate around cap and trade money, and that's going to happen with or without high-speed rail. And I would also submit that I think there are plenty of people in this state who are going to be in the same position they were in 2006 of wanting to have a market mechanism to deal with very stringent carbon emission reduction guidelines.
So the whole AB 32 is a separate issue from the specific ones around whether you actually have an allocation at this point in time that takes you out to 2050 that you can bond against, that you can count on, and my understanding is that it's nowhere near as clear as you characterize it.
Different views. I don't see how the underlying organic legislation can be a separate question. And by the way, last year, or in 2014, the legislature gave us an ongoing, continuing appropriation of 25% of the cap and trade money. They also said when they did that the money could be used for the construction of the high-speed rail system as well as for financing. Now, we weren't in a position to either fully construct or finance by 2020. So I think that's just by its own terms in the legislative authorization for the specific cap and trade allocation for high-speed rail. It's hard to read that as we're going to give you this money for financing, and oh, by the way, it goes away in 2020.
Well, I'm not saying that it's determined that you will not have the money past 2020. I'm saying it's not determined that you will.
And I think if you read our business plan, we are clear on that.
Well, when you say that you are fully funded...
We didn't say that. What we said was, with the money we have in hand, or that has been allocated to us, if it continues, we will have the funds to build this. Mayor, everybody asks us, how are you going to build high-speed rail? Our answer is, we know how we can build high-speed rail. If the legislature has given us this money, the federal government has given us money, the state voters have given us money, with those funds, we can build an operating leg for high-speed rail.
I don't have it in front of me, although maybe it's here. I thought that the PowerPoint presentation that we received in advance of this meeting said exactly what I said, and which is also what you said minutes ago, that it was fully allocated enough to build the San Jose. But let's set it aside for the moment. Yeah, it says right here, it says
fully funded, I understand.
Fully funded.
Right.
And you just said that you never said that, and nobody said it. And okay, but let's really move on to,
I'm not sure what your point is.
My point is that I think that...
I think I was very clear in the presentation that I made. I understand that the PowerPoint may have shorthanded it, But I think we've been clear in our document, I've been clear in public statements, I was clear here tonight, and I've said it about 4 different times. I mean, if you've got problems with the fact that high-speed rail is being built on the peninsula, that's fine. If the point of attack is these things, that's fine too, but I'm not going to agree with
No,
that.
what I really want is to have what you've stated was your intention, which is to not repeat the errors that occurred in 2009 through 2011. And those were myriad. Amongst them were a lot of claims that were ultimately not credible. And I encourage you in the strongest way to make sure that the statements the authority is making on the broad sense about the whole program, as well as specifically for the peninsula, are made carefully and credibly. And that is a big part of my point on being concerned about, frankly, responding to some statements that I heard tonight that I wasn't expecting to hear. Statements that I think, and many would think, are less credible than I expected to hear. But I really want to concentrate on the peninsula discussion tonight. So I would just set those aside, and I'll just leave that with that strong encouragement to be cautious about the statements that are made and make sure that they're credible. But on the peninsula, we do have real concerns. First and foremost, about the process. You talked about an overall strategic approach to grade separations. I would include that to really the entire peninsula design segment and the assumptions that go into this. And that we've had this discussion in this group that the process that's going forward, with it being basically around a CEQA process and not something that is, well, frankly, the context-sensitive solutions process that was agreed to for this segment and in the prior business plan and got dropped as the blended system came in, that sort of process needs to be adopted, and that the rush that was driving this accelerated CEQA process is diminished by the current realities of your plan and your funding prospects. Now, I understand that there is some value to you of having all your environmental clearance lined up should one of these new unidentified funding sources come forward. But that is a hypothetical value against the real concerns that the peninsula has over going through this process in a correct, thoughtful, deliberative manner that is really looking at the full range of alternatives analysis with the right stakeholders together, and to do this in a deliberate way that is not truncated and trying to be shoehorned into the CEQA process. So we've had this discussion. I think it's a stronger case now than it was previously that we should do this. And I'm looking forward to colleagues' thoughts on whether that is what we want to ask for with some consensus.
Let me just take other questions. There's time to deal with that.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
We're going down the line.
We are, yeah.
All right.